November 4, 2025. UPS Flight 2976 lifts off over Louisville, its left engine blazing. 7 people dead. The official records show a catastrophic malfunction, but what scientists uncovered inside the crash wreckage shattered everything Boeing claimed about safety. The evidence seized that night points to a flaw no one saw coming. The answer isn't what you've been told, so what did they really find sealed inside that laboratory? At 5:13 p.m. Eastern Time, the air above Louisville split open with a roar. UPS Flight 2976, a 34-year-old MD-11 freighter, had barely left the ground when disaster struck. The left engine, already trailing fire as the jet accelerated down runway 17 right, flared brighter. Bystanders on the airport perimeter captured the moment, smoke billowing, the aircraft clawing for altitude, then lurching sharply left, its nose dipping. In less than a minute, the plane's brief climb ended in chaos as it slammed into the roof of a UPS supply warehouse. The impact tore through steel and concrete, scattering debris across the tarmac and into neighboring businesses. A petroleum recycling plant and an auto scrapyard, both consumed by fire in the seconds that followed. Emergency alarms triggered across the airport. Over 100 firefighters raced toward the burning wreckage, their trucks weaving through a maze of shipping containers and fuel trucks. Police set up a perimeter and ordered thousands to shelter in place, fearing toxic smoke and the risk of further explosions. The city's Big 4 bridge glowed yellow that night, a silent tribute to the lives lost. Inside the ruined warehouse, the toll became clear. 7 people were dead, 3 crew members and 4 workers on the ground. 11 more suffered burns, fractures, or smoke inhalation. 2 remained unaccounted for as dawn approached. The flames, fed by jet fuel and building chemicals, took hours to contain. In the aftermath, twisted metal and scorched cargo marked the path of destruction. First responders combed the scene for survivors, then for remains, then for any clue as to why the flight had ended in catastrophe before it had truly begun. Outside the cordoned-off crash site, families waited for news. Kentucky's governor issued a statement of condolence. UPS's chief executive officer promised full cooperation with investigators. But the questions grew louder. How could a routine takeoff turn into a fireball in seconds? What failed in those final moments above the runway? And what, if anything, could have been done to prevent the loss? The scale of the disaster was not just measured in numbers, but in the faces of those left behind. The city's busiest shipping hub was silenced, its workers sent home, its runways dark. The official count, Agamen says 7 dead, 11 injured, was only the beginning. As the smoke drifted over Louisville, the hunt for answers began, and the evidence left in the wreckage would soon draw the eyes of the world to Boeing's shadow. At 5:45 p.m. Eastern, the first NTSB field officer logged the evidence transfer. That notification triggered a cascade of documentation. On the tarmac, evidence clerks began the methodical work. Every fragment of wreckage, from scorched fuselage panels to the fractured engine pylon, received a numbered tag and barcode. Each tag matched a line on the custody manifest, the details inked in block letters, part description, recovery location, time, and the initials of the collecting officer. The paperwork started with Form 6120.15, the official accident report, its header stamped with the accident number, blurred for now, pending NTSB release. This form, completed by UPS operations and signed off by the duty officer, anchored the chain of custody. Every subsequent form, from the field log to the evidence transfer sheet, referenced this identifier. As dusk fell, the clerks worked under portable floodlights, their gloves smudged with soot. Each item, whether a twisted actuator, a melted circuit board, or a section of wing spar, was photographed in situ, then wrapped and sealed in tamper-evident bags. The process left no room for error. A single missing tag or unsigned handoff would compromise the investigation's integrity. By midnight, the last of the major wreckage had been loaded onto flatbeds and escorted to the airport's secure hangar. There, a second team cross-checked every tag against the intake roster. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder recovered from the crumpled nose section were boxed in foam and signed over to the NTSB transport officer. The intake forms bore the same docket number as the field manifest, with each step recorded in a running ledger. The next morning, the evidence convoy rolled out. Destination: the NTSB Materials Laboratory Division, accredited under ISO EC 17025, Certificate A2LA 1237.01. At the lab, a liaison officer received the shipment, her signature completing the custody chain. Every item was scanned, cataloged, and assigned a laboratory accession number. The intake roster listed each part's provenance, from runway to lab bench, ensuring that no evidence would be separated from its paper trail. Even before the first micrograph or CT scan, the investigation's credibility rested on these forms and signatures. The chain of custody would be scrutinized by regulators, lawyers, and technical experts. Any gap could cast doubt on the findings. For the scientists preparing to analyze the fractured metal and scorched wiring, the unbroken documentation offered one certainty: what they found in the lab would be linked, without question, to the disaster that had silenced Louisville's busiest runway. A steel table in the NTSB Materials Laboratory became the next battleground for truth. Scientists in cleanroom suits laid out the fractured pylon attach fitting, its surface still streaked with soot from the Louisville runway. Under the scanning electron microscope, the metal's story began to unfold. At the heart of the fracture, a crescent-shaped scar traced the path of a fatigue crack, its growth frozen in time by the violence of the crash. Beach marks, like ripples on a pond, radiated outward from a fastener hole near the upper aft edge. Each mark recorded another cycle of stress. Another day the part survived before giving way. CT scans sliced through the fitting's cross-section, revealing the crack's true reach: 37 millimeters from origin to rupture, enough to sever the load path between engine and wing. Annotated images highlighted a zone of altered microstructure at the crack's root. Here, the metal was 18% softer than the surrounding alloy, a result confirmed by microhardness testing. The EDS spectra told a subtler tale: a spike in manganese and silicon, just above baseline, hinting at contamination from a past repair. The surface bore the telltale dimples of shot peening, a protective treatment meant to shield against fatigue. But on this fitting, the peening was uneven, overlapped in some places, absent in others. Tool marks around the failed fastener hole ran at odd angles, deeper and more ragged than factory exemplars. Comparing the failed part to a control fitting from an undamaged MD-11, metallurgists traced the differences. The fillet radius at the crack origin was tighter than blueprint, the surface rougher, the protective layer disrupted. Chain of custody tags matched the fitting to the Louisville wreckage, linking every scan and micrograph back to the runway. Each anomaly found in the lab, but every deviation in geometry, hardness, or chemistry, was logged, photographed, and cross-referenced against maintenance records. The evidence pointed to a slow, relentless progression. A crack born in a zone of rework, fed by the stresses of flight and the scars of imperfect repair, growing until the metal could hold no more. The part's history, written in microscopic detail, would soon raise questions about every similar fitting still flying. At 14:58 Coordinated Universal Time, the cockpit voice recorder captured the first tremor in the data stream. The flight data recorder, tracking every heartbeat of the aircraft, logged a sudden drop in hydraulic pressure on the left system, a loss that for an MD-11 meant the difference between control and chaos. Seconds earlier, engine parameters had been steady, N1 and N2 readings in the green, exhaust gas temperature within expected limits, fuel flow rising with the climb. Then, without warning, the left engine's numbers flatlined. The flight data recorder traced a sharp dip in N1, followed by a complete loss of generator output. Simultaneously, the electrical bus went off, and the hydraulic system reported fail. Inside the cockpit, the master warning lights snapped on. The audio panel filled with caution tones, overlapping in a shrill mechanical chorus. The captain's voice cut through. Engine fire, left side. The first officer answered, hydraulics are gone, no response on 2. In the background, the automated system called out, Fire, engine 1, hydraulic low pressure. The checklist for engine fire and hydraulic failure, drilled in simulators, now had to be run in real time, with smoke already visible through the left window. The flight data recorder showed the crew's response in parallel. Throttle retarded, fuel shutoff commanded, fire handle pulled. But the data revealed a deeper problem. Flight control surfaces, powered by the failed hydraulic circuit, stopped responding. The aircraft's attitude began to change, the roll angle increasing as the left wing dropped. Rudder input spiked, then faded, as the pedals lost authority. The pitch data oscillated, reflecting the crew's attempt to arrest the descent. At 17:15:05 Coordinated Universal Time, the cockpit voice recorder recorded, "We've lost the engine. No aileron, no elevator." The captain's final command, "Try right, full right," was met with silence from the controls. The flight data recorder's last seconds traced a grim pattern: altitude falling, airspeed bleeding off, vertical speed pegged negative. The last call-out, brace brace, was cut short by the impact signature, a jagged line across the data log, time-stamped to the millisecond. In the lab, investigators aligned these traces with the physical evidence: a fractured pylon fitting, torn hydraulic lines, and a cockpit transcript ending in chaos. The data did not just record a failure, it exposed the moment when a hidden crack, grown unseen for years, claimed both the machine and the hands guiding it. On the laboratory bench, the fractured pylon fitting came with more than just scars. It carried a serial number stamped deep into its web, barely visible beneath the soot. The serial was 7B4426. The same number appeared handwritten in 3 places: on the chain of custody tag from the Louisville runway, in the intake log at the NTSB lab, and in the original maintenance ledger signed by UPS's line manager. Each signature and timestamp traced an unbroken line from the moment the part left Boeing's supplier to the instant it failed above Louisville. The maintenance logbook, bound in thick plastic and flecked with grease, told a longer story. It listed the fitting's installation date, its supplier lot MXA44, and the initials of every technician who had touched it since, cross-referenced against Boeing's own batch records. The lot code matched a shipment delivered in 2013, flagged at the time for a minor dimensional deviation. The records described a fillet radius at the fastener hole measuring 2.4 millimeters tighter than blueprint. An engineering drawing pulled from Boeing's digital archive overlaid perfectly with the lab's CT scan. The deviation was not theoretical. It was etched in metal, right at the crack's origin. A copy of the original blueprint, marked Revision D, specified a minimum tolerance for the fillet, no less than 5.0 millimeters at the critical interface. The failed fitting fell outside that window, its radius pinched and uneven. Photographs from the lab, annotated in red, highlighted the mismatch. The maintenance manager's initials on the job card confirmed that the part had passed visual inspection, but no gauge had measured the fillet in situ. Supplier paperwork attached to the back of the log referenced a Boeing waiver for the lot. An internal memo stamped, "Accepted with deviation," authorized the installation despite the out-of-spec feature. Every document, every number, every overlay became a link in the chain. The serial, the lot, the drawing, the waiver, all converged on one point. The failed fitting on Flight 2976 was not an anonymous casualty. It was a documented outlier, tracked from factory floor to crash site. The evidence did not rely on memory or conjecture. It lived in signatures, blueprints, and the cold geometry of a broken part. Federal regulations on paper demand that every aircraft part meets strict standards. Yet hidden in the text of Title 14 of the CFR, Section 121.363, subsection C, is a clause that leaves a gap wide enough for disaster to slip through. This rule, intended to guarantee that every installed component is airworthy and documented, relies heavily on operator self-reporting, especially for cargo fleets. Unlike passenger airlines, cargo carriers face fewer unannounced inspections and can defer certain maintenance actions with little outside scrutiny. Over the last decade, this loophole has allowed patterns to form in the shadows. Loophole: a review of the FAA's Service Difficulty Reporting Database reveals the warning signs. 14 separate entries, spanning 12 years, document fatigue cracks and pylon fitting anomalies on the MD-11 fleet. Each report describes a similar story. A fine fracture discovered during scheduled maintenance, a part swapped out, a brief note filed. No fleet-wide directive ever followed. The reports accumulate, but the pattern remains buried in technical language and scattered across years of paperwork. Warning signs. Regulators have the authority to intervene, but the threshold for action is high. Without a clear string of catastrophic failures, the FAA often stops at issuing advisories or recommending voluntary inspections. The system is designed to catch outliers, not slow-moving trends. In the case of the Louisville crash, the failed fitting had a documented history of repair and deviation, yet no regulatory action flagged it for removal. The oversight process, meant to be a safety net, became a sieve. Oversight. On January 12, 2026, Boeing released a brief statement. It expressed sympathy for the victims and pledged support for the investigation, but offered no technical explanation. The language was measured, careful, and silent on the specifics of the failed part. UPS issued a similar release, promising transparency while deferring all questions to the NTSB. Neither company addressed the history of fatigue reports or the regulatory gap that allowed a compromised part to remain in service. Silence. The silence from both boardrooms echoed louder than any admission. Families and investigators alike were left to sift through redacted memos and press releases, searching for accountability in the spaces between the lines. The official record grew longer, but the answers stayed just out of reach. Accountability. At 5:13 p.m. on November 4, 2025, 7 lives were lost when UPS Flight 2976 crashed in Louisville. Forensic analysis confirmed a 37mm fatigue crack in a critical pylon fitting, 18% softer than specification, that triggered catastrophic hydraulic failure at 17:14:58 Coordinated Universal Time. Chain of custody documents and ISO 17025 accredited lab reports established a direct link between the failed part, serial 7B4426, and a 2.4mm deviation noted on original Boeing drawings. Yet over a dozen similar service difficulty reports remain unresolved, and the full metallurgical transcript has not been released. Boeing's January 12, 2026 statement denied systemic fault, citing compliance with FAA Clause 121.363C. The official record shows documented evidence gaps and regulatory loopholes that persist today. For the victims' families and the global aviation community, the unanswered questions are not just technical. They test the limits of accountability. The Louisville crash stands as both a warning and a demand. When evidence speaks, industry silence is not an option.